If you're just getting into woodworking or you've just picked up your first router, these are 5 must-have router bits I think every woodworker should have. Plus, I'm going to share with you what router you actually need to get started and some tips and tricks to help you work safer and easier. Let's go. Now, when I first started woodworking, the router was probably one of the more intimidating tools in the shop, even more so than the table saw to me. It seemed like every time I picked one up, it just didn't feel right. It was a little sketchy, a little scary, but it wasn't until I learned how to use them properly that I got very comfortable with them. So in this video, I want to share a few tips with you to help you feel a little bit more comfortable using the bits that I'll recommend, and then I'll share some recommendations on routers that'll probably help clear some confusion up for you. Before we get started, if you'd like to check out any of the router bits that I'm going to mention today or any of the routers or accessories, I'll link those in the description and the pinned comment to help you find them easier. Before we talk about the router bits that you actually need in the shop, let's talk about routers, because if you're looking for your first router, it can be confusing on which one to buy because there are a ton of options out there. First, let's talk about styles of routers, because that's going to matter. These smaller ones, like all of these cordless routers and then this corded Makita, they're all called trim routers or palm routers. It depends on what site you're looking at or which description it is, but it's the same thing. Trim and palm routers are the same thing. Basically, small handheld routers. These are really good for most of these bits that I'm going to talk about today, and they're less expensive than some of the bigger options out there. So if you're just getting started and you're on a budget, probably a trim router is the way to go. But they do have some limitations with power, which we'll talk about. If you're going corded, either the Bosch or the Makita, I'll link to both below. Trim routers are a fantastic option. They're about a 1 or 1 1/4 horsepower routers, so they should have plenty of power to do anything that we're going to talk about today. If you're looking at cordless routers, it really depends on what battery platform you're in, because all of them have solid options. We're talking Rigid, Ryobi, Milwaukee, DeWalt, Flex. It doesn't really matter which platform you're in. Even Bosch just come out with a brand new, and it's a fantastic little router. Their first cordless 18-volt router in the US. It's a fantastic option. But my very personal favorite is the Milwaukee M18 trim router, and the reason is because it just fits well in the hand. It's well balanced. It's just a good all-around router. But I'm also the big fan of the Ryobi 1+ HP line. Just make sure you get a brushless router when you're looking at these. The older Ryobis are actually brushed. They're a little less powerful and they have less battery life. But ultimately, it depends on which battery platform is which one of these you'll choose. All of them are fine. If you're looking for a more powerful router that's corded, I recommend one of 2, depending on your color choice or your preference. It's either the Bosch 1617 or the DeWalt DW618. Both of these are fantastic routers. I actually have a video comparing these head to head, and they're extremely similar. They both have 2 1/4 horsepower, so they have plenty of power to do anything you're going to want to do in most applications for a router. And we're talking about cutting grooves, dovetails, all kinds of good stuff with these routers, and the plunge bases make them ultimately versatile. So these are the way I would go if you're looking for a plunge/fixed base router, and they're both similarly priced. If you want the biggest, baddest cordless router on the market with the best plunge base that I have used to date, it has to be this brand new DeWalt that come out in 2024. One of the main things I love about this, other than the plunge base, it also has anti-rotation, so if you do get a kickback, it shuts the motor off. I think this is a fantastic safety feature, and it also has an overload protection warning that lets you know if you're pushing it too hard. The plunge base is one of the best on the market. It is one of the smoothest on the market. This is by far my favorite plunge router to date, and I have tested the Makita 40 volt, which is a really good router as well. And even the Milwaukee, I think this one outdoes all of them. And as far as ergonomic goes, it's just a good all-around router. But due to the price and kind of limited versatility of just having a plunge router, I think you would be better off with like the DW618 or even a trim router for most cases. Another thing to keep in mind is bit sizes. They come in 2 sizes here in the US mostly, and that's 1/4 inch and 1/2 inch shank. And all that means is the base of the router bit that goes into the router is either a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch around. And these style routers, both this DeWalt and the Bosch router that I mentioned before, come with both 1/4 and 1/2 inch collets. In other words, a collet is what accepts that bit. So you can use either size you want. Now, all trim routers, such as these, only come with 1/4 inch shanks. So when you start looking at router bits to buy, it's probably going to be a 1/4 inch shank unless you have a specific purpose for getting the 1/2 inch, like you're cutting bigger grooves and things like that. Now, if you're looking for the safest routers you could buy, it's going to be this big old beast with that anti-rotation, or I like this Bosch trim router, and this actually comes with a plunge base and a combo kit. I reviewed this a while back. This is a fantastic router, And it has a feature on there that if it drops and when it lands, it'll stop that spin. Not necessarily on the drop, but on the impact. So if you do drop this, it will stop the bit from spinning. It's a really nice safety feature. So depending on your comfortability level with routers, if you'd want either one of those safety features. They are nice to have though. So before we get to the 5 bits that I absolutely recommend that every woodworker should own, let's talk about how to use these bits safely so you feel more comfortable and you kind of understand what I'll talk about when we go into the router bits. First, router direction. Which way do I move this router so that it doesn't push back, kick back, and scare the living daylights out of me? I've had some kickbacks and they're scary, especially with that spinning bit. You do not want to touch that thing. So how do you do that? First and foremost, if you look down at your piece of material, when you're looking at it, if you make an L sign with your right hand, that's going to tell you which way to route on the outside edge of your material. So if I lay it down on this board, it's pointing away from me on the right side. So that means I'm going to go counterclockwise. So if you look down at this piece of stock, when I'm looking at it, we're going to push away from me on the right side, and then of course right to left on the back side. And then if you move to the front side, left to right. So it's going counterclockwise all the way around. If you're routing on the inside of anything like trays, boxes, picture frames, that sort of thing, then you're going to go clockwise on the inside. So really all you have to remember is counterclockwise on the outside, clockwise on the inside in most cases. This is called a push cut. If you go the opposite direction of what you're supposed to, that's called a climb cut. But for safest operation, let's stick to push cuts for beginners. Another thing to keep in mind, if you want to stay safe using a router, a sharp bit is a safe bit. The duller the bit, the harder it is going to be to cut, and then the more struggle you're going to have making that cut. I really highly recommend not getting the cheapest set of router bits that you can buy, because a lot of times they just dull so quickly. The first few cuts are going to be fine and you're going to think they're great, but after a few uses they're going to dull really fast, and then when that bit gets dull you're going to have a harder time cutting. It's going to make burn marks and make your projects kind of ugly and harder to deal with to finish them up right. So getting a good quality set of bits is key. I'll recommend a few here. There's actually a 15-piece Bosch set that's pretty well priced. I'll link that in the description below. I have this 6-bit set. It comes with most all of your common bits like Chamfer Bit, Roundover Bit, and even some flush trim bits. And we'll discuss what all of these do in just a minute, but this is a good solid set. And then there's also the white side 4-bit set that has 2 flush trim bits, the Roundover and the Chamfer Bit. White side is a small family-owned company right here in the USA, and I love their bits. They stay sharp a very long time. But I don't think you could go wrong with either the Bosch or the white side depending on your needs. On any bit, when you insert them into the router, you want to push them all the way in and let it seat, and then you're going to pull it out just a little bit, and then you can tighten that collet up with the wrenches that are included with your router. Now when you set the height of a straight bit, no matter if it's one of these smaller bits or even one that's a little bit bigger like this big 3/4 inch wide bit, we'll talk about what each one does, but when you set these height bits, one of the best accessories I've ever bought is this Craig setup bar set. It's a really nice set, aluminum, and you can set multiple depths with this, whether that be on the table saw or even the router. So these are very versatile, but I like these because if I needed to go a 1/4 inch deep, it has a 1/4 inch marked on there. That notch is exactly a 1/4 inch. So if I'm going to be routing a 1/4 inch deep hole, I can just use this setup block to get that precise cut that I'm going to need. These go from 1/8 all the way up to a 1/2 inch, so you get a very good range of depths that you can set with these. Now as far as roundovers and chamfer bits, the way you want to set that depth is typically if you're looking for the roundover, you're trying to get up over that square edge there to the rounded part of the bit. So you want to move your router base up until it's only showing the rounded part, and then you can lock it in place. How your router adjusts depends on which router you have. This one, the Ryobi, the Milwaukee, all have this little fine dial that you use to move it up and down. And the DeWalt and Flex have a ring that moves the base up and down. So it just depends on which one you have, but they all typically have a little lock lever. Now most all routers, doesn't matter if it's a trim router or a bigger router like this, have a variable speed. And this is very important to get the correct settings and to operate them safely. The main thing to remember is the bigger the bit, the slower the speed you're going to spin this at. So if I've got a big bit like this, I'm going to turn down that speed to a 1 or 2 so that this isn't spinning as fast. There's a lot of mass here moving, and the faster it's moving, the kind of more dangerous it can become if you do it wrong. I made a big mistake one time spinning this giant flush trim bit on a router table too fast, and it caused some pretty good kickbacks. So you don't want that to happen, just dial that speed back. Now on the smaller bits, you want to spin them faster because there's not as much there to spin, and they'll cut much better the faster they're spinning. So you're going to move that speed all the way up. Basically, just remember, the bigger the bit, the slower the speed. The smaller the bit, the higher the speed. So let's talk about the 5 router bits you I think you absolutely need in a wood shop, no matter your skill level or where you're at in woodworking. First and foremost, probably the most famous router bit, or the most popular router bit there is called a roundover bit. Now, the roundover bit's going to put a nice rounded edge on your product or your finished piece. So if you're making cutting boards or even tables, or any number of things, you can knock that sharp edge off the wood and make it nice and finished looking. A lot of people love the roundover look, and it's just a good solid bit to have. There's different sizes of roundovers. You can get some very small roundover bits, 1/16 all the way up to 3/8 or a 1/2 inch roundover bit, maybe even a little more. But really the most common is probably a 3/8-ish roundover. It's really nice. And you can adjust the depth to adjust that roundover a little bit. And another thing a lot of people don't realize on a roundover bit is you could actually drop your base down so that the roundover bit has that square shoulder that I told you to hide earlier. You can expose that, and it creates a really nice detail on a tabletop or any other product that you want to have that detail. It's a very cool little feature of a roundover bit. It almost simulates what is called an OG bit that has a different profile as well, but the roundover bit gives you a similar look, and it's very common. Next bit you need is a chamfer bit. The chamfer bit is also a very popular bit. It basically puts a angled edge on your product versus the round edge. This gives it kind of a really nice, sleek, modern look, depending on what you're going for. I like a chamfered look on most products versus a roundover, but roundovers are absolutely essential to have in the shop. Chamfer bits come in different angles and different sizes. Most of the time it's going to be a 45-degree angle or so, and all of these bits, the roundovers, the chamfers, etc., all have the bearing right on the very end of those. And what that does is ride along the edge of your material, and it prevents it from digging in too deep. So you want to make sure those bearings are still there if you're using it on these trim routers or even these bigger routers like this. It just helps get a cleaner cut. Now, the third bit I think you need is a flush trim bit. Now, there's a couple of different styles of flush trim bits that we're going to talk about, a top bearing and a bottom bearing. If you're looking at a bottom bearing flush trim bit, it'll have this wheel or bearing on the bottom, and that's going to ride along the stock and trim up anything above it. Or there's also top bearings, in other words, it's on top of the bit, and that's going to ride along the top side of the stock and flush trim anything below it. What these are really good for, and what most people use them for, are patterns. So if I wanted to make the same shape over and over and over, I can use my router with a flush trim bit and that pattern, and we can just produce things over and over again. So in other words, if you're making the same shape charcuterie board, you can batch those out very easily with a pattern. The number 4 bit I think you should have is a straight bit. Now, these come in various sizes, and it depends on what you're going to be doing with them as to what size you'll get. First, a nice 3/4 inch straight bit is fantastic, especially if you're putting grooves down in wood for T-track, because they're 3/4 inch wide. Like I did on my workbench here, very easy to do. You're going to take shallow passes. You don't want to cut too deep at a time with these straight bits. You want to make sure to go about 1/8 or so inch deep, make the pass, drop it another 1/8, make a pass until you get to your final depth. And in this case, it's 3/8 of an inch for T-track. And one thing that will help you with that are those Craig setup blocks like I showed you before. There's a 3/8 inch setup bar, so you can check that final depth before you make the pass so you know it's exactly where you need it to be. Another great use for straight bits are dados and rabbets or box joints. Like, there's a whole bunch of things you can do with a straight bit. There are various different sizes of 3/4 inch bits. Some of them are made specifically for plywood. I'll link to a set below. They're basically undersized because if you don't know, if you're buying plywood, it's not exactly 3/4 of an inch thick, but these bits specifically for that will cut that groove exactly the width of that plywood, so you'll have a really tight fit. And I always use the 1/8 inch straight bit to cut for my tabletop fasteners. So if you want to fasten your tabletop to your frame, you want to use something like tabletop fasteners. That allows expansion and contraction of the top without it causing any breaking or anything like that. And so I was able to cut those with a straight bit. When using straight bits, depending on the application, a straight edge or a guide is really helpful. So if your router has an edge guide, I highly recommend using those if it's applicable to where you're cutting, or at least set up some type of straight edge or guide so that you can cut that straight line without it moving. I've clamped things down, like just a board before, just to use as a straight edge. It just depends on how straight that board is, how exact you need that cut to be. But if you can use an edge guide that comes with most routers, or at least is available for most routers, that's the optimal way to go. It just helps keep things nice and accurate. Number 5 bit I think every woodworker should own is a dovetail bit, but not to cut dovetail joints specifically, while you can do that with them. That's not what I use it for. I think the micro jig dovetail system is one of the most genius things ever created, and I've used it on a ton of stuff. There's a jointing jig I use, so if you don't have a jointer, there's plans available for this, but it's very easy to make. You're just going to route these dovetail grooves in a piece of plywood, and then that's going to allow you to clamp down a board and cut a straight edge on it. That's going to give you a nice jointed edge. In other words, really straight so you can put together tabletops or even cutting boards or anything like that. And I even used it in my safer crosscut sled to add some clamping capabilities. You can even build a complete workbench with this dovetail system so you can clamp down anywhere you need to. And there's dozens and dozens of applications for this. I think it's one of the greatest things we've ever been given in router bits, especially to be able to build your own jigs, your workbenches. I even built a little mini workbench that you could take around that has that dovetail stuff in it. Like, it's a fantastic system, and it's very inexpensive for what you're getting. If you're just getting into woodworking or routing specifically, these 5 bits will cover 90% of what you're going to want to do in your beginning stages of woodworking. Then once you're more comfortable using those, you can branch out and get other profile bits like OG bits, Cove bits. I mean, the options are endless, but these 5 get you started. I've linked to all 5 bits as well as all the routers you've seen today and accessories in the description and that pinned comment to help you find it easier. If you're a beginner and you're looking to make some money with your woodworking, I put together a free course that will help you get your first sale fast. All you got to do is go to school.com/731woodworks. There's a free course. There's also 90+ project ideas to get you started and 3 live interviews with members of my Sawdust Startups community on how they're making money woodworking. Go check it out, school.com/731woodworks. It's absolutely free. If you'd like a deep dive into router basics so you're absolutely confident when you start using your router, click that box right there. That video is going to walk you through everything you need to know about using a router. Click in the box, get you the big old virtual fist bump.